Welcome 32 and everyone. This is the latest edition of Beyond the Tape. I am your host, TJ Wingert. This is presented by 32 Beat Writers. And today we get to unveil the fun stuff, my wide receiver and tight end rankings. So we've got 20 receivers and 10 tight ends that I'm going to go through. I'm sure you guys all have a lot of thoughts on all these prospects as well as the names that I don't get to in today's video. So love to hear those thoughts in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube, or in a reply back on X, or you can shoot me your thoughts on X via the DMs. You can follow me at TJ Wingert, spelled Wengert. Well, we could turn this into an almost 5-hour stream and, unveil each name on the back of a chair and make this an all-day event. If you know, but I have a feeling that we all have better things to do. So let's go ahead and jump right into the fun of it. Starting with receiver number 20, Kobe Hudson, receiver from UCF, almost 6'1", but he's 6'3", 193 pounds. And just really, you'll see there with a unique trait. I like his lateral movement skills. I like his acceleration. UCF's offense was far from one of the best passing attacks that you'll see in college football. KJ Jefferson just wasn't all that great. So only 47 catches, 770 yards. Won't stand out to you, but when you watch him on film, he just looks like a guy who will hold up the next level. Probably a Z receiver, not great against press, so get him in Z, put him as a Z, get him in motion. Could also be a slot receiver, and just like the way he moves, smooth, fluid route runner. And I think does well enough at the catch point. 193 pounds, though, it's not necessarily going to be his calling card. I will say he also was at the Senior Bowl just for day 3 of practice, which I think says a lot about his eagerness to go out and prove his name. It's because Brew McCoy got hurt after 2 days of practice. So Kobe Hudson stepped in, and getting to see him up close in person, again, he kind of passes the smell test. He looks like an NFL receiver, moves like one, and likes what I saw there. Receiver number 19, Ty Felton from Maryland. 6 foot, 1 1/8, 183 pounds. So even more slighter frame, but another one of these Senior Bowl guys, and another one of these guys that just put it on display. He did it for all 3 days of practice, though, but silky, smooth, route runner, and I am definitely biased to guys of that ilk. He's also a guy with a ton of production. 143 targets, 96 catches, 1,119 yards to go with 9 touchdowns, rather. That would be crazy, but just 9 touchdowns. Just another one of these fluid route runners. I'm biased to these types of guys. I've seen some Stephon Diggs comps out there. I'm not going to go quite that far, but also a 4.37 40 time, 1.51 in the 10-yard split, so a silky smooth route runner with plenty of long speed and as well as really nice acceleration. Receiver number 18, you're not going to quite say the same thing. That's Pat Bryant, 6'2 1/4, 204 pounds, 4.61 in the 40, 1.56 in the 10-yard split. So actually the 10-yard split's not terrible, but 4.61, you can see where he kind of loses steam, but he's also just an X receiver. So you're not going to ask Ty Felton to play the X. It's just a different role. Honestly, Pat Bryant at the Senior Bowl, another one of these Senior Bowl guys, had more wiggle than I kind of thought I saw on film. He was kind of, on film, I don't want to say stiff, but just kind of looked like a prototypical X receiver. X, he runs those, typical X receiver routes, works the middle of the field. Maybe has a little bit more juice after the catch than you would think. And part of it, maybe, I could see a world where he slimmed down a little bit for the Senior Bowl. And because of that, had a little bit more wiggle, a little bit more burst. And I thought he actually performed really admirably at the Senior Bowl as well. 10.4 broad jump, I think, is a solid mark for him as well. 984 yards, 14.4 yards per reception, 10 touchdowns. I mean, he checks a lot of those boxes. And, everyone on this list, minus Kyle Williams, I think he'd be okay if you took him in the top 100, which is to say if you took him in the 3rd round. But Kobe Hudson, Ty Felton, Pat Bryant, Tez Johnson, I'm all kind of thinking of them as 4th round receivers, just so we're all clear on where we're at. But again, I like the body control, I like his frame, and I like his ability to go up and catch it and win it in the air. Then Tez Johnson, this is the tough one because 5'9 and 7/8. In a lot of ways, you could just call that 5'10". That's what I decided to do because there's only so much space I could put on these graphics. But the real bugaboo, 154 pounds, what he weighed in at the Combine. At the Senior Bowl is 156, so that is in and about where he plays. The other thing about the Combine, 4.5, 140, but then he also puts out one of the best 3-cones. So that's where it gets a little tricky, 6.65 on that 3-cone. So sub-Devil's 3-cone, that's pretty spectacular. I will say you see that shiftiness, specifically at the top of his routes, and that's why I had to include that. And that's where he was winning at the Senior Bowl, right? Like, especially in these one-on-one drills where there's no pressure on the quarterback. Here's the top of the route, and no one was sticking with him. He can snap on it like he can snap on a quick on the snap of a fingers, on a dime. Also uber productive. Another one of these guys, 10 touchdowns, 989 yards, 82 catches, and that was Evan Stewart was a little bit of a disappointment to me this year at Oregon. I think it was a good decision for him to go back, but I will say those numbers may not jump off the page a whole lot, but he's also sharing the love with a lot of other, playmakers there at Oregon, including another guy we'll talk about later on, Terrence Ferguson. I'm thinking he's going to have to be a receiver that gets into a play-action heavy offense. I think he's a receiver 3. Like, if the Seahawks were replacing Tyler Lockett with Tez Johnson, sign me up for that. Clint Kubiak, play-action, Rashid Shaheed type of role for that offense and that, type of scheme for Clint Kubiak, right? Like, play action, let this guy get deep down the field, it snap off at the top of the route. The Minnesota Vikings, another place. I'm going to say the same thing in a lot of ways for a guy like Kyle Williams too. Play action heavy, let these guys work deep down the field. Still receiver 3, specialized role, but in that right offense, the right role, he could be one of these guys that has 40-something catches, but a ton of yards, and is one of the league leaders in yards per reception. So I think he serves an important role in an offense, and if he's your third receiver, I think ultimately in a few years' time, we'll be pretty happy about that. Kyle Williams, I have him right now as a 4th-round guy, to be honest with you, but I know he's a hot name right now in the scouting community. I know he's Phil Simms receiver 2. He's in friend of the pod, Mike Renner. He's got him receiver 6. The Goat House, great content creator on YouTube and great football scout in a lot of ways. Just really look up to that guy. Receiver 10, he likes a lot of. He's well liked by a lot of people in this space. I get it, and there's a lot to like, but he does come from a little bit of a smaller school. Technically, still Pac-12, but Pac-12 was 2 teams this year. 5'10 and 5'8", 190 pounds, so we're talking about a Z. At first I kind of did look at him, and he was at the Senior Bowl too. There, 190 pounds, I think I'd be curious to go back and see the Senior Bowl weight, but I would venture to say he was a little bit slimmer there, or at least he gives off the appeal of being a little bit slimmer, even if that is truly his weight at 190 pounds. So at the Senior Bowl, it's like, yeah, man, like, really fun, yards after the catch, gadget guy, and that is one of his calling cards. Most certainly, this guy is a forced missed tackle machine. 21 forced missed tackles. That is 4th most of any of the guys that we're going to talk about in today, which I should have mentioned earlier. Ty Felton, 26 forced missed tackles earlier on, so that would be 3rd best. But yeah, Kyle Williams is a force after the catch, and that's kind of hard to put on display at the Senior Bowl because nobody's tackling. But you could see in the shiftiness and how he moves, and you see it on his tape, right? Like, that he jumps out in open space. He makes a lot of guys miss. So at the Senior Bowl, I was kind of thinking, okay, slot, gadget guy, okay, cool. The more I dove into the tape after the Senior Bowl, though, and, especially as his name gets hot over the last few weeks, I'm like, all right, let me just go back in and let me see, that 3rd time looking at it. Sometimes when you go back and check out these films or this tape for these guys, sometimes your mood's different each day. Sometimes, depending on who you looked at right before that or right after it, might kind of sway your opinion on it too. So it's good to go back and revisit these guys. And you know what? I could see where there's a little bit more Z potential there, like a Miami offense, right? Like they have Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, but those guys battled injuries. If they drafted Kyle Williams and he became that Z in that offense, utilizes a lot of motion, I think that'd be a good fit. The Los Angeles Rams, another team that utilizes a lot of motion. Shout out to the Goat House there. I think that's a great landing spot. Kind of a blend of DeMarcus Robinson and Tutu Atwell in a lot of ways there. Or, like I said, the Minnesota Vikings. Like, I think that would be a great spot for him to go. He's got the speed to challenge over the top 4.4 in the 40, 155 in the 10-yard split, so he checks out from an athletic standpoint, but just a sharp route runner, quick twitch, very sudden. The question is going to be 190 pounds. Is that truly his weight? And then how does that transfer at the catch point at the next level? And that's where, again, you probably want to put him in motion, avoid press at all costs, and let this guy get into open space, right? So I like Kyle Williams. Late 3rd, early 4th, sign me up for it. And I think a really solid receiver 3 at the next level. I'm just not quite there with everyone else, seemingly over the last few weeks, making him, a top 10 receiver in this class. But that's good. In the next 2 guys, you could certainly make, honestly, you could have sold me on an argument where he's receiver 13. You could have, just depending on how you feel about Horton, Harris, and Williams here that we're going to talk about now. Torrey Horton and Trey Harris, I'll kind of lump them together. Torrey Horton, 6'2" and a half. Trey Harris, 6'3" and 2/8, or 3/8 rather. Trey Harris, 205 pounds. Torrey Horton, right around the same mark, just under 200 pounds. Both good athletes. Torrey Horton tested a little bit better in the 44.41. Trey Harris, that's 4.54, but yeah, that's a guy that I think moves a little bit better on tape. And when they're healthy, a lot of production there, especially Trey Harris. Now, a lot of that comes against the Furmans and the Georgia Southerns of the world, and it's an Lane Kiffin offense, so it's hard to translate that necessarily to the next level. But what you do see with these guys is, hey, they're big, they're physical, but while they also are big, they have that long speed, but there's also more wiggle and more route running prowess than these guys you would maybe think, right? Like even more than a Pat Bryant, right? Like sometimes you see these 6'2" plus receivers and you're thinking, sacrificial X, let this guy run wind sprints. These guys, there's a little bit more route running nuance. Now, it's not always, right? Like, especially for Trey Harris, a lot of four verts in that, Ole Miss offense. But, Daniel Jeremiah clipped out a tweet against Wake Forest, and he did the same thing in another game that is now escaping me. It might have been in the Kentucky game, but a similar route where kind of double move, work to the sideline, and you can see where he can snap off in the snap of a finger. So I think there's a little bit more potential. But the other big thing that kind of holds back, and again, if you want to move Kyle Williams in front of these dudes, I totally get it, is the injury history of the last couple of years for both of these guys. Like Tory Horton I think he played 5 games, might have been 6, but he missed a substantial part of last year. Trey Harris got re-injured in the Florida game. They certainly missed his presence in that one, and he missed games the year before that too. So, big physical traits, all that stuff is there. Production when they're on the field. It's just going to come down to what your medical is. But I am a little bit more intrigued in these bigger body X-receiver types who could do a lot of different things. And again, they showcase better route running prowess than you would think for someone that size. So that's why ultimately I gave them the trump over Kyle Williams. And then we get to Savion Williams. And, I'm trying not to fall for the Quentin Johnston thing, my receiver 2 that year. That's a bullet that I'm having a hard time taking a bite out of. But again, I could totally see where these guys are kind of interchangeable with Kyle Williams. Again, I could see Kyle Williams late 3rd. I'm kind of thinking Trey Harris, Tory Horton, Savion Williams, as well as the 2 guys above them, all in the 3rd round. But, Savion Williams and Trey Harris, Tory Horton, probably mid to late 3rd. So, again, room there if you like Kyle Williams more to bump him up a few spots. Savion Williams is really unique. 6'4", 224 pounds. Didn't test all that great. 4.48 I think is a solid time. I think he got that on the second run. 1.52 in the 10-yard split's pretty solid, but especially when you consider his size. But I remember some people were hyping him up to like he's going to break the combine, he's going to be low 4.4, all that sort of stuff. So sometimes these guys combine hype, it gets a little too overblown. But 4.48 in the 40, that's a great time for someone who's 224 pounds. And really, you see it in the calling cards right there. Awesome yak player. He's fantastic out in open space. They'll give him handoffs too, right? Like he's got production as a receiver and as a running back. And then he also will possess some natural ball skills. Like he'll have a couple of plays where you're like, whoa, okay, there is, he's not just a running back. There is something more here to Savion Williams. And that's kind of where I get intrigued. And that's honestly part of my difference and where I don't think he is going to be, Quentin Johnston or anything like that. Because Quentin Johnston, size, and even he didn't test that great for long speed, but it was there on tape. He runs away from the Michigan defense. Yards after the catch, he can make these guys miss. He's a little slippery. He's pretty slim, and maybe that's what it is, and guys just can't get their hands on him. But ultimately, when push comes to shove and it comes down to make a play in the air, he just didn't have those ball skills, right? And he wasn't a great route runner. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of traits there, but he's a receiver who struggles to get open unless it's schemed up underneath, and he's a guy that I have inconsistency with his hands. So honestly, going back to that, he should have been a lot lower for me, especially considering when the guy he's behind is almost the complete opposite in JSN. But Savion Williams possesses pretty solid ball skills and just like natural instincts. In case in point, both his touchdowns against UCF, like that is like there's something there. Like this guy knows how to play receiver. He knows how to go and attack the football, and that's where I'm hoping there's a little bit more to be done there with Savion Williams. The route running is certainly a work in progress. And, right now, it's kind of hard to figure out a role because, size, you would say 6'4", 224, play that guy at X. Nah, certainly not. And that's kind of also the hard part for his value. Right now, I got him as like a mid to late 3rd round guy, but it would have to be for the right team, right? Like, so the 49ers, like that's like the easy one. There's your Debo replacement. Or, Miami, who's going to utilize Yak in these offense, stuff like that. So he's kind of a tricky prospect, but for someone that big who moves that well, Cordero Patterson comp from Todd McShay, I think is spot on. The body type is certainly there. But, he's a really intriguing player, and it's going to come down to what he can develop into as a receiver. I don't think Deebo Samuel is really that great of a route runner, so there is precedent for what his skill set is working, but Deebo Samuel's is kind of one-on-one there. So that is certainly an outlier for that skill set, and you don't want to bank onto that too much. All right, then we get to receivers 12 and 11, Isaiah Bond, Jalen Royals, respectively. You see the sizes there. Royals, actually, we'll come back to that. Isaiah Bond, he actually just had his pro day time at 4.35, so he actually bested the 4.39 mark. That was his second combine number, and it was a 1.51 on that 10-yard split at the second combine. I did not remember to grab the 10-yard split from the pro day. That is homework for me to do after this video. But, man, I can't quit Isaiah Bond. I mean, the long speed's there, and I will say the 2023 Alabama tape is certainly better than the 2024 Texas tape, and, you almost wonder, I've said this about a couple of different guys, a couple of different positions, but if you flip the years for these guys, what's their rhetoric around them, But nevertheless, he was also banged up and playing injured throughout the course of the year, and then eventually down the stretch, it's Matthew Golden's it's his offense. He's kind of the passing attack's running through him and Gunnar Helm. We'll talk about later. But dude, not only is it the long speed for Isaiah Bond, but he is such a sudden player, not only in route running, but like stop-start ability. And like, I can't remember exactly the game, but it was early on this season. See if I can find it real quick. But they do the Davante Adams route where you're in the red zone, he's out wide, and then you put him into motion, bring him to the line of scrimmage, bring him to the left tackle, and then he just snaps back off of it, goes back the other way. And I'm telling you, it happens like that. And it's just an absolute thing of beauty. And it's things like that, again, doesn't have the size of someone like a Davante Adams. But when you can do stuff like that, color me interested. I think it was actually the UTSA game. Yeah, I don't think it was Florida. So it was either, and he had 2 touchdowns against UTSA. So I think that was one of those 2 touchdowns against UTSA. Which, granted, I know it's not, SEC competition. So take it with a grain of salt if you will. But it's that athletic ability. Not only the long speed, but stop-start ability, change of direction. And I think there is more room for him to grow as a route runner. And I already think that with how sudden he is, he can already get open as is. So it's going to come down to, I've also heard some character things, could be there for Isaiah Bond. So it's going to come down to your team and talking to him and how comfortable they are with him. But I see a whole lot of potential here as long as he's healthy. So I'm not ready to quit on Isaiah Bond just yet. Then we get Jalen Royals. 4.42 in the 40 at Indy, 1.49, 10-yard split, which... yeah, and that to me is 2023 Jalen Royals, another one of these guys where go back another year. He looks more explosive than he is in 2024, and a little bit more big playability. And if you're telling me, hey, he's still getting back to 100%, and now he's starting to hit that top end speed and pull away, have that pull away ability, then sign me up for this because I see a really fluid, smooth route runner. I've heard some people kind of knock on it, but I think he's got a good awareness for where defenders are in zone coverage. I think he adds some nice nuance, shoulder fakes, head fakes, things like that. I think this guy is, and at the Senior Bowl too, I echo the thoughts of Sam Monson. There's kind of just something smooth and fluid about this guy. He makes it look effortless, and maybe that's kind of where people are like, the route running could be better. But I don't know. We say the same thing about guys who are faster than we actually think, and it's just because they're just gliding almost. That it doesn't look like it's that fast, but then you put a stopwatch to it, and there it is. And like I said, at the Senior Bowl, going against great competition, the guy was getting consistently open, especially on day 3. I thought he really popped on day 3. And a good size, 6 foot 205. So, and at one point I was kind of thinking, 2024, maybe he is kind of a slot route running guy who's going to get open consistently for an offense. But if you're telling me 4.42 at 205 pounds, that guy can play on the outside too. I don't think he's great against press. That is definitely something that holds him back. And I think it's just the release packages, but also he could certainly be a little bit more physical. So maybe he's a Z, but if that's kind of the flaw in my receiver 11, and I can get Jalen Royals in the 3rd round, and I can kind of work on that release package, sign me up for that, and we'll see what happens down the line. But even if he's just a Z and I'm drafting in the 3rd round, I'm excited about what he could do. I think he's going to get consistently open at the next level. So sign me up for that. Big fan of Jalen Royals. All right, let's get into the top 10 now. Xavier Restrepo. All right, here we go, folks. I know. I saw the pro day times, and he didn't run at the combine. I hear you all. And the fact of the matter is, he deleted this tweet, but he basically went on and said, my hamstring tightened up right before we officially started the pro day, and that's why the time was as rough as it was. And I'm inclined to believe that. Now, I know, again, he deleted the tweet, and that makes it sound like he's lying, but I bet that's probably his agent being like, don't say you're injured during this part of the process. To me, that's kind of more of what I read into it as. But the fact of the matter, speaking of his agent, if he was a 4.78, 4.83 guy, his agent's not letting him run that. Not even at the pro day. Not at all. And in his tweet, he basically said I was consistently between 4.58, 4.63 laser time. And I had written down in my note 4.62 to 4.6 to 4.62. That's kind of where I pegged him, which isn't great, but you can make that work at the next level. And the fact of the matter is, even if that 40 scares you off, right? Which I understand it does for a lot of people. Were you drafting and ranking Xavier Restrepo with the thought in mind that he was a 4.6 guy? I mean, a 4.4 guy? Because if so, then I don't know what tape you were watching. There was never a point in his career during his film this year that would lead you to believe that he was going to run a blazing fast 40. The thing for him was the 3-cone. And now, granted, we don't have a 3-cone time, which is a little unfortunate. But, again, I go back to what I saw at the Senior Bowl. He looked a whole lot faster than 4.8. I saw it up close and personal, and he was getting open all 3 days. In one-on-ones and on 11-11s. And that's another difference. Jalen Royals, Xavier Restrepo, not only were they getting open on one-on-ones where it's, you and you can just run a TikTok route to steal, a term from Corey Kinnaman, and there was one other person who was tweeting that out during the Senior Bowl whose name I'm now forgetting. Andrew Hawkins, there we go. Yeah, you could kind of do some crazy stuff and get open in a one-on-one, especially if it goes on long enough, right? And there's enough space on the field. These guys were doing it on 11-11s too, like full team drills. They were getting open in a legitimate, NFL-like setting. So I'm not worried about the 40. And again, like I expected 4.6 or so, and I believe his tweet. I don't see 4.8. I didn't see it in person, and he gets consistently open. So even if so, you know what? Like I'm okay with it because the 3-cone is where it's at for the guy because this guy gets consistently open. He's also a cerebral football player, 5 years of starting experience. We did get to interview him at the Senior Bowl, and he talked about how much tape he watches and how much football he's played and how that's made him a really great player against zone. And Miami saw a ton of zone coverage this year. They weren't going to let guys like Elijah Arroyo be matched up against, a tight end or a safety. You can imagine why. We'll talk about him later on. In man coverage with how sudden Restrepo is, you don't want to leave him on an island. But also, Cam Ward had that ability to extend plays. Just hold on to the football. Hold on to the football. I'm looking for a big play. It's a lot harder to run man coverage against that versus zone. You can keep eyes on a quarterback and you can kind of maintain some discipline there. So I see a guy who's sudden enough to beat man coverage underneath. Again, I'm not, even me, a fan, holding Xavier Restrepo here at receiver 10 despite all this. I ranked him because I knew he wasn't going to be a field stretcher. So he gets open underneath consistently against man coverage. He's sure-handed. At 209 pounds, he can work the middle of the field. He absorbs contact really well. He'll make those tough catches. And then he's cerebral against zone coverage. Like, I just don't let the 40 get in the way. Whether it's real or not, I'm inclined to think that it's not. Because I don't know why his agent would let him run that if that was the time. The guy gets open. And he serves a specific role. And that's a role in a day and age where 3 receiver sets are more and more prevalent. Sign me up for it. I have him as like a early third round guy. Early to mid third rounds. That's where I'm comfortable with the Restrepo. Maybe with the 40 time, it's more mid third round. Then we get into our second round bunch. These are the guys all the way up to the top of the screen I love in the second round. And honestly, it wouldn't shock me if Jaden Higgins snuck into the first round for the right team. Jalen Noel. And great interview. Love talking to him at the Senior Bowl. We got to talk to him actually a few times, once after practice, once the next day. And you could convince me to flip him with A Manor. It just comes down to what you're looking for. I don't see Jalen Noel as a slot only. I almost see him almost kind of like a Tyler Lockett. I know the size isn't ideal, but the ball tracking is fantastic and the long speed is absolutely there. And he's a sharp route runner that gets open against man coverage, but another cerebral, smart football player that can get open against zone. And there'd be a lot of times Iowa State would put him and Higgins on the same side of the field and force defenses to switch back into zone coverage. And he's a guy they would put into motion a lot, doing that stuff too. Bring him over to that side with Higgins, get on that head start. And if he's got a head start, look out. So he's a Z, but I also think he could be an awesome slot. There would be times where they put him in the backfield and they give him some handoffs too. So a lot of different ways you could use him. Only 12 forced missed tackles, only 3 forced missed tackles last year. Not necessarily, a huge part of his game. Not as much as you would necessarily think. But nevertheless, I see a shifty player, and Tyler Lockett also not a guy who forced a lot of missed tackles, became a guy who ultimately started to go down. So, but I see a guy who's such a shifty route runner that I have a hard time thinking that he won't be a guy who can make some guys miss the next level in space. 5'10", 194 pounds. I like that size. Hand size is a little bit small, 8 3/4. But again, the ball tracking to me is fantastic. Sub 4.40, 1.51 10-yard split, shuttle of 4.17. 6'8", 2.3 cone. He was a 41.5-inch vertical, super explosive, can get off the line of scrimmage. He may not have the physicality to beat press, but if you miss with the hands, this guy's going to score 6 for that offense. So he blew up the combine. Huge fan of his game, huge fan of the person, big time fan of Jalen Noel in the second round. And then we get Alec Iaminer. And really, it just comes down to, do you want a guy who's going to be an X at the next level, or are you comfortable taking a Z/slot? Because then you could totally convince me to flip those two guys 8 and 9. But I like Iaminer, redshirt sophomore this last year at Stanford, 6'1", 6'1" and 3/4, and then 206 pounds. Getting too fast, getting too excited to talk about a guy with 10-inch hands. Ran 4.44 in the 40, 1.58 10-yard split, 38.5-inch vertical. He's checking all these boxes, and again, one of the younger players in the class. Also, I should say 10.7 in the broad jump. And I mean, back-to-back years, and this is not going to sound super sexy, but watch Stanford play. Watch Stanford's quarterback play in specific. Yeah, it's not pretty. But back-to-back years with 63 catches this last year, 6 touchdowns, 831 yards. That's good enough for me. Also a better route runner than you would think for someone that size. Like, I think he's got more nuance there. I do think he needs to expand the route tree probably the next level, but also if he's playing X, maybe not. 10 forced missed tackles too. I think that's a solid mark for him to be at considering the role he's going to play. So I'm intrigued with where it's going to go. I do think he can clean up on some of the drops, a little bit. Drop percentage, 57.8%. Not great, so let's sure up those hands a little bit more, but some of that also comes down to how you try to drop. Again, Stanford quarterback play has been pretty rough, but he's also on the younger side. I think get him with the jugs machine as soon as you draft him. I think we can overcome that. But even if you do deal with some of the drops, the more impressive thing to me is getting open, and I think this guy gets open at a high level. Great athlete, great size. Let's get on to Jack Bech, the Senior Bowl MVP. Fantastic story, 6'1" and 1/4, and unique trait right there, reliability. And I mean that is Jack Bech. He's just sudden enough of of an athlete to get open both on in-breaking routes and out-breaking routes, and he's super sure-handed. May not be the most insane make you miss in the open field, but I do think he has some catch and run upside. Didn't run a 40, didn't run a 10-yard, so therefore he didn't get a 10-yard time. No real surprise there. 6'8" in the 3-cone, again showcasing that lateral agility, that suddenness, that change of direction skills. 34.5 in the vert, 10.5 in the broad. The broad's okay, the vert's not great. Not going to be a jump ball receiver. And you can see where he's explosive enough, but not nearly to the likes of some of these other guys like a Jalen Noel. But Bech also a guy who played inside and outside, 2/3 outside, 1/3 inside. He's a solid enough blocker. He's a willing blocker. And at 6'1" 1/4", 214 pounds, I think that is a role where if you're the Los Angeles Rams, if you're the Green Bay Packers, if you're the Atlanta Falcons, you're salivating over getting this guy in there. And I mean, Sean McVay, and then, Atlanta's kind of McVay disciple. Matt LaFleur kind of comes from the Shanahan world, and they're all kind of mixed in there. They're kind of cousins in some ways, maybe even more closely related than that. So yeah, that type of offense, and especially if you use tight sets, I love this guy on those outbreaking routes. Let him utilize the sidelines as his friend, get the toes down, sure-handed. Yeah, there's a lot to like about Jack Bech. Middle of the second round, man. Just go get a reliable, solid football player. And again, the Green Bay Packers that's going to be tough for me to stop mocking because you go from one end of the spectrum who is super unreliable in Christian Watson to one of the most reliable players really in this draft in Jack Bech. How could you not be excited about that if you're Green Bay? But I also think, like I said, the Falcons, that'd be a hot fit. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, the Rams have a second-round pick. I think the Panthers actually have their second-round pick. So if they can find a way to get in the second round, though, that would be a awesome ad. Even though they got Devontae and Puka Nacua there, I think that'd be a great fit. Then we get to Jaden Higgins. He's the last of the second-round bunch. Could see him sneaking into late first. The Packers have never drafted or haven't drafted a first-round receiver since 2002, right? Maybe, doubt it, but maybe. But I do think if he's there in the second round, that's another great Packers type. The New England Patriots, even though I know they just brought in Stephon Diggs, this could be their X type. Certainly look for Jaden Higgins to go pretty early on in the second round. 6'4" and an 1/8. It's rare that you see these guys at their college listing actually maintain that height and weight at the combine, but Higgins did just that. 214 pounds. 80-inch wingspan, too, among the best in the class. You love to see that. Big, physical wide receiver with a wide catch radius. Oh, and not to mention 4.47 in the 40, which is plenty good for someone who's 6'4", and to go with that a 1.53 in the 10-yard split. So lots I like about Jaden Higgins, and there are a few guys in this class that run a dagger route better than Jaden Higgins. This guy is going to be a quarterback's best friend, work in the middle of the field while also having the ability to challenge over the top and win those 50-50 balls. Jaden Higgins, my guy, the more I watch, the more he's grown on me. I was kind of going back and forth going into the Senior Bowl, which one I like more, him or Noel, and I still like them both. And again, in a lot of ways, I could almost just put them side by side. And it's just, do you want the X or do you want the Z/slot? I think you're going to get good football players. This second round receiver room, this class, these 5 guys right here, minus Restrepo, maybe take him the third. You're going to love these guys. I think these guys are going to be really solid, dependable football players to the next level. And we may look back at them and be like, wow, they went on day 2. Who let that happen? But all that said, let's get on to the 5 guys that I have first round, potential first round grades on. Let's start with Matthew Golden, another one of these guys that seems to be draft community's best friend. And I've said this a number of times. I just don't see 4.29 on tape. I'm sorry. I've seen some where I think Brian McFadden actually was talking about it on Pushing the Pile, where he says he saw it. That's okay. I respect him. Hey, former Pittsburgh Steeler, a Steelers fan, I got to respect his opinion. I just don't. In my notes I had 4.48 written down. Wouldn't have shocked me if it was 4.44, but 4.48 give or take was about what I thought. And I saw someone who's a very fluid route runner, contorts really well in the air. Like I kind of like what Puka Nacua has become. Especially last year, this guy who can just do so much in the air and work back to the football and make those tough grabs. Matthew Golden did that specifically a ton in the college football playoff. And now you're telling me there's 4.29 speed in there. That's very interesting. And I got to credit Daniel Jeremiah, 5'11", 191. That's almost a near size comparison to Santonio Holmes. And man, like sharp route runner, consistent hands, better in the air than you would think. There's a lot to see there with Matthew Golden to Santonio Holmes. So, Daniel Jeremiah, one of the best in the biz. There's a reason for that. So again, I don't fully see the speed there, but if you're telling me that's there, awesome. That just gives me that much more reason to buy into it. And he's making a meteoric rise upwards, right? And for a team like Dallas at 12, you want CeeDee Lamb in the slot, and he can challenge over the top. But if you can open up the underneath and middle of the field for CeeDee Lamb with a field stretcher like Matthew Golden, do it. If you're the Seattle Seahawks and you have two quote unquote slower receivers than Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, go get a field stretcher and Matthew Golden to replace Tyler Lockett and push those safeties back and open up middle of the field more for these guys. So he serves a specific role. I'm not going to go as far as say receiver one, but I do like Matthew Golden, and I have for quite some time. Emeka Egbuka, just a guy who does all the little things right. Almost 6'1", 202 pounds. Very solid blocker, savvy route runner, sure-handed, inside-out flexibility. I know he played at Ohio State for a long time, but you don't become one of the prolific wide receiver colleges, all-time leader in receptions, receiving yards, if you're not good, right? Like, again, some of that is a lot of playing time, a lot of experience in college, 4 years there. But the guy can flat out play, and I thought he rebounded from I don't want to say 2023 was poor, but 2022 set the bar pretty high for him. And 2023 was a step down. He was definitely overshadowed by Marvin Harrison Jr. 2024, he took a step back in the right direction, and that was with Jeremiah Smith. Obviously being, at the center of attention for a lot of college football fans. And some of that's also, it just didn't really work out all that well with Kyle McCord at Ohio State. Glad he bounced back at Syracuse. And Will Howard got better and better over the course of the year. And also, I think Chip Kelly had a large hand in that, too. I think an offensive revamp helped out Emeka Egbuka as well. But, mid to late first round, I think this is, maybe this is the Seattle guy. Maybe this is, Green Bay's first round receiver. I can totally see Houston still going this direction. He's got built-in chemistry with C.J. Stroud. He would totally be a Baltimore Ravens type where it's like, oh, man, they just got another good football player. Why did we let that happen? And shoot, I know the Eagles just won a Super Bowl and they have two good receivers. See how long A.J. Brown's there. But if they made Emeka Egbuka their third, how good of a blocker he is in that offense that wants to run the ball with Saquon Barkley, that would be an awesome fit. And then you also have some built-in flexibility for a Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown potential injury. Yeah, I think a lot of teams would just be wise to take him before he gets in the second round. Luther Burden comes in at my receiver 3, 6', 206 pounds, 4.41 in the 40, 1.54 in the 10-yard split. Hands are a little small at 8.5 inches, and I don't love that. And the other thing I don't really love is his route running. He's just not really that super polished of a route runner. But that being said, he's so dynamic with the ball in his hands, and he's so shifty and can make you miss in the open field. I almost have the T. Higgins type of thing there, where it's like, this guy, if he can be that elusive and have that much wiggle in open space, we can work on that route running. We can take some of those traits and skill sets and apply it into a different setting. So I think there's reason for him to improve as a route runner. But to be honest, my rule of thumb for receivers is you have the short, which I call 0 to 10, and then you have the intermediate, 10 to 25. You can call it 10 to 20. I kind of vary, 10 to 20, 10 to 25. Either one's fine for me. And then let's just call it 10 to 25 for this one. And then deep ball, 25 plus yards down the field. You've got to be able to win at least 2/3 of those if I'm going to draft you in the first round. Got to win at least 2/3 of those areas. And with how good he is after the catch, in open space, and again, not a crazy good route runner, but I think there's enough savviness right now to where he can get consistently open underneath. So there's one. And again, 4.41 in the 40. I feel like everyone's kind of forgetting about the long speed and deep ball potential that's there with Luther Burden. Throw on the South Carolina slot fade. He did the same thing against Texas A&M. It got called back, but that's not his fault. He didn't hold. So this guy can get open deep down the field. And that South Carolina one, he made a really insane one-handed acrobatic catch. And that's the other thing of his element, another element of his game that I think is being overlooked. He's better at the catch point than you would think. He can make some tough grabs, and that's where, hey, he can work the middle of the field too. So is he going to run like a sexy dagger route like a Jaden Higgins? No. You're not drafting Luther Burden to play the role that you're drafting Jaden Higgins. So I get it. Hey, if he doesn't go in the first round for Tom McShay and Daniel Jeremiah and Mel Kiper Jr., hey, they're some of the top dogs in the business. That's cool. I'm going to keep putting him in the first round because to me, he's definitely a first round talent, and he excels in those two of those three areas, and I think there's reason for him to grow in the areas where I don't think he's that great. So I'm not cooling on Luther Burden. I still like the player a ton. And then here's where we have a little bit of movement. If you've been following me throughout this entire draft cycle, Tetairoa McMillan, it's really 1B, 1A, but I kind of ran out of space, so I just did 1 and 2, and that's not really fair to y'all. But Tetairoa McMillan, and sorry, I know he doesn't like being called Tet, but again, spacing, just got to work with spacing. But Tetairoa McMillan, you can call him T-Mac. I still have him as a top 10 player on my board. Like I'm right there with the love for Tetairoa McMillan, that guys like Trevor Sikkema and Marcus Whitman at TFG. I'm with those guys. And double checking, yeah, McMillan's the number 6 player on my board. So I don't know where all the hate's coming from. I get it. He probably wouldn't have run a 4.4 flat, a 4.3, a 4.2. No. But the fact of the matter is, Daniel Jeremiah, he had the tweet, only one receiver in the last, X amount of years has gone in the top 15 while running in the 4.3s or 4.5s. He didn't include Mike Williams in that. I don't know what Marvin Harrison Jr. would have run last year, but, Hayden Winks, in their breakdown of Tetairoa McMillan, he said 4.53. He's probably in that ballpark. I can see that, but 4.5 to 4.53, and Daniel Jeremiah set the cutoff at 4.5. I think Mitch J could have been around that mark. And then Drake London, the other obvious one, where, yeah, he's probably 4.53-ish, give or take, maybe a couple hundred seconds one way or the other. So I don't think it's unprecedented. I think we just got tired of Tetairoa McMillan, and we got excited about Matthew Golden all of a sudden. So I'm going to stay firm with it. Again, all first-round grades here. I just really like Tet McMillan, and he doesn't have this wide of an arm span or like a wingspan. He doesn't have quite as long arms as someone like a T. Higgins, who I actually think that's... The more I watch him, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of T. Higgins there, too. I've been kind of saying Drake London this whole cycle, but there was a lot of T. Higgins there as well. But Higgins' arms were like 34 inches, and Tetairoa McMillan's is 31 and a half. But that being said, like, what he can do in the air. I mean, the fact of the matter, he had a over 50% contested catch rate on like 38 contested catch opportunities is ridiculous. Like, the more volume, that percentage just starts to lower and lower and lower, but... he went up and over 50%. That's ridiculous. But I also think he's a solid enough route runner. People who say he can't get open, I don't know what you're talking about. I see him get open. It's not Matthew Golden. It's not even Emeka Egbuka. It's not even Travis Hunter. It's not Kyle Williams. But he's got a different body type, and he plays a different role than a lot of those guys. So I'm just not understanding. It feels like we're hating for the sake of hating just because we're tired of talking about the same guys. But at 6'4", 195 pounds... Oh, that can't be right. 219 pounds. Sorry, I got to update that in my notes. Let's do that real quick. Physical X-receiver who separates enough, who's nice after the catch, too. 29 forced missed tackles last year. That's the second most of anybody we're going to talk about, trailing just Luther Burden, who had 30. So he can get open. He can make the tough grabs. He wins in the air. And he can make guys miss in the open field. And, he's doing this in a year where Arizona's offense was certainly a disappointment. Hey, take it from a guy who had Arizona's preseason over at 7.5 wins. I was expecting a lot more out of that team, and they certainly let me down. Noah Fafita took a step back. Everyone on that offensive line, minus Jonas Avanaia, I think took a step back. The coaching overall took a step back. Their defense got worse. Arizona was just a huge step back, minus Tetairoa McMillan. To me, I think he hit all the expectations I had coming into the year. Also, 10-inch hands. Love to see that for an X-receiver. So, yeah, I don't get the hate for Tet. But I did have to move him down to 1B because the more you watch Travis Hunter, it's just like, dude, like there's some OBJ, Justin Jefferson type of stuff with him. And, I've said this at corner. He's got the best ball skills of any corner I've ever seen. And really, even for receiver, man, for someone who's sub 6'1", might be some of the best ball skills I've seen for a sub 6'1" receiver, really. But he's 6 foot 3/8, 188 pounds. I do worry about that frame and how many hits he could possibly take. Arm length's about the same as Tet McMillan, 31 and 3/8. Wingspan's about the same as well. Hands are 9 and 1/8. Not too worried about that. But a very good athlete. And, at the beginning of the cycle, I was like, I think he can add some more nuance to his route running. But the more you watch, you're like, no, he's fine. He's a good route runner. And I think a lot of that is riding on his athleticism. But I also think getting to play both ways, he knows how to... What would I not want to see here, right? Like, if I'm a corner, how would I set myself up? Like, I think his football IQ kind of almost overcomes that. So I do think he has some nuanced route running. And he is such a good athlete, and he can snap on a dime. But a big play threat, get down the field with those ball skills, good route runner. Just not much to hate on with Travis Hunter. Really, the one thing, and I think Chris Sims is spot on, like, may not have like 80-yard touchdown potential. He's not like that, but like other than that, like you'll take the 50-yard, play if it's not 80, It's all good. Yeah, Travis Hunter's just a freak of nature. So I did have to make him my receiver 1A just because there's just really not many flaws to the receiver tape. But don't think that as a knock against Ted McMillan. He's kind of the 1B here. So, but before we get over to the tight ends, we got to pay some bills.
Rookie. It's all about rookie talk in fantasy football right now. So why not go use all that knowledge to do something other than a mock draft? Chris Gimino won $8,000 with just 2 teams last year, and each draft took 5 minutes. That's pretty good ROI. You can start doing rookie drafts for money today on Fast Draft. The Origins tournament is live. It is the place to go and monetize your knowledge of rookies and use your favorite player profiler host promo code for a $25 deposit match. Now let's go start drafting faster.
All right, let's get on to the tight ends now. We'll be a little bit quicker here, but Jalen Conyers, for me, it was the change of direction of the 3-cone at the combine that I was like, okay, now I am very interested to see where this goes. Sub 7-second 3-cone to me at 6'3", 260. He was the first tight end to run a sub 7-second 3-cone at 260 plus pounds in combine history. Big physical guy, and that was, the 3-cone was kind of what sold me on Ben Sinnott last year too. So like the 3-cone, ability to get open, change directions, lateral movement, that is definitely something I'm a sucker for, and especially at that frame. He's not really a great blocker, but with that height and weight, you would think that he should be better at it. So I think there's reason for him to grow and continue to get better as a player. I have a 5th round grade on him, as well as Mitchell Evans here. He's just not a spectacular athlete. That's just not what you're going to draft Mitchell Evans to be, but in line, solid blocker, and I think as the year went on for Notre Dame, they leaned into him more and more like they did pre-injury, and really that year he got hurt, he was easily the best playmaker that, I'm a Notre Dame fan, that was easily the best playmaker we had, so we just kind of had to lean into him, and there's really only so much you can lean into a not great athletic tight end, and eventually he got hurt because of how much we were putting the ball in his hands. But 6'5" and 3/8, 258 pounds. I think he'll be even a little bit bigger at that at the next level. But you shave weight so that we can run a 4.74, which actually turned out to be a decent 40 time for some of the tight ends that ran. But yeah, inline blocking tight end, not drafting him to be your alpha unless you're just like a team that doesn't prioritize position. But as a wrinkle in the mix, as a guy who frees up your other tight end to go play in the slot or play H-back, absolutely. And he's sure-handed, works middle field, can make some tough grabs. Solid footwork along the sideline. Yeah, he's a good football player, for sure. Then we got Oronde Gadsden. He's intriguing because watching his tape, he's 228 to 230 pounds. I'm fully convinced. But then, he added some weight at the combine. At the Shrine Bowl, I think he got to 238. Gets to the combine, he's 243. So we're maybe working in the right direction. But the thing is, on his tape, he's basically just a slot receiver he's just a receiver, basically, for Syracuse. But sharp route runner, sure-handed, can make things happen after the catch. There's a lot to like in Oronde Gadsden. It's just going to come down to how much the added weight's going to change his game. And his tape doesn't really show NFL tight end, like full-time tight end, unless you're going to play him as an H-back. If you play him an H-back and you drop him in the 4th round, you have a role in mind for him, sign me up for that. But if you're drafting him to be your inline tight end, I'm going to need to see it before I fully buy into it, even at, a combine weight of 243. Because, again, I think it's Syracuse who's at that 230 mark. And I have a 4th round grade, like I said, on him. Then we get to Harold Fannin, Gunnar Helm, and then our tight end 5. I have a 3rd round grade on them, but, tight end 5 could maybe go a smidge earlier than that. But Harold Fannin Jr., he's a fun player, right? 6'3" and a 4th, 241 pounds. Didn't test spectacular, but it's fine. 4.71, 156 in the 10-yard split. Sub 7-second 3-cone, I think was a great mark for him. 6.97 to be exact. And that's what you see, a guy who can separate, utilize the change of direction skills, get open up the middle of the field. Bowling Green ran that offense through him. They played him at X receiver. They played him at Z. He played inline tight end. He played H-back. He played slot. You name it. Wherever they need to get the ball to, it was Harold Fannin, having that offense funneled through him. So the production's obviously off the charts. I think he's got good hands. I think the Senior Bowl was okay, but that's kind of where, if he had a good week there, he'd have a potential, tight end 3 on our hands here. But I think a step up in competition, that's the other thing, right? Bowling Green, not the stiffest of schedules, right? At the Senior Bowl, I think he looked, like he had met his match, so to speak, right? Like Sebastian Castro had a couple of good one-on-one reps with him and didn't look like Castro was ever overwhelmed at any point. So I think Fannin's I think he's a good player, but I also do wonder how much in line he could play. It worked out well enough for him at Bowling Green, but he's probably going to be more of an H-back type of tight end. You're going to have to get him off the line of scrimmage. Don't lean into his blocking ability, at least not until you can get him a head start. Kind of the Isaiah Likely conversation we've had. I've seen Delaney Walker out there as a comp for him, too. I think that's really solid, but a really solid receiver. So it takes the right offensive mind that says, hey, you know what? I don't need him on the line of scrimmage. I'm going to use him as a big slot and as a H-back, and we're going to get him his offense and his targets through that. If so, this guy's going to be a really fun player and a really productive guy for you. If not, and you try to pencil him into a full-time, just inline, Y role, I don't love that as much. Then we get on to Gunnar Helm, and the testing was certainly disappointing. I believe that ankle injury hampered him a good bit. 6'5", 241. Really, the thing is for him is yards after the catch. I mean, the guy's an absolute monster. He's got great balance, like core balance, to where he can just kind of make these moves where he's not necessarily juking someone, but he's just kind of stepping around them almost. It's kind of hard to describe, but just great core balance and body control. And then he's got the ability to lay a stiff arm into you, put his shoulder into you. He's a big physical tight end in that regard. Awesome over the middle of the field, yards after the catch guy. He can get open consistently. I don't think the blocking's great, but he's a solid athlete, and that's where like the 4.8, 4.40, like I don't see that at all on tape. And it's a lot of wide zone stuff for Steve Sarkisian, and he's willing to get on the move and try to do his best as a blocker. He needs to get better there, but I think there's reason to think that he will over the course of time. So I'm not ready to quit on Gunnar Helm. I'd still take him somewhere in the third round. Let's get on to our top 5 guys here. Terrence Ferguson, he could even go late second. Like, wouldn't shock me if he ended up sneaking in somewhere in the 60 to 64 range, there at the end of the second round. But early third round guy, 6'5", 3/8, 247 pounds. Talked to him before the Senior Bowl. Sweet as can be, like, super nice guy. And just does a lot of the little things right. Like, I'm not saying he's the Emeka Egbuka of the tight end group, but, like, finds a soft spot in zone, sits and waits, solid after the catch. Not going to wow you, but big body, and he's not going to go down easy. Can get open enough against man coverage. Very sure-handed, solid blocker. Just kind of like bees across the board for Terrence Ferguson. So, just one of these guys that I think could. And tight ends don't typically hit the field and make a huge impact for an NFL team, but Ferguson I think is kind of like an immediate play now guy just because he is so solid across the board that even if you're not needing him to be like the pass funnel of your offense, just get him in play in line and get him 40 catches his rookie year. You'll be pretty happy with it, and you're going to get a solid enough blocker. So just rock solid across the board. A really fun player to watch. And then we get to the tough one here. Elijah Arroyo, Mason Taylor. I went back and forth on who I wanted at 3, who I wanted at 4. Honestly, you could convince me either way. I decided to go with Arroyo at 4 just because he does have the injury history. He did not run at the Miami Pro Day, which that's typically not a great sign. So, a guy who's battled injuries, you don't love to see that. But at the Senior Bowl, dude, he put it all on display. Very nice athlete, very fluid, and the route running is certainly coming along. Made some tough contested grabs there at the Senior Bowl as well. And this year at Miami, you see a guy who can stretch the field with as a seam runner. He can run those corners off of it. Can work the middle of the field. You could make him a yards after the catch guy because he is a good fluid mover. Just give him the ball underneath and let him turn up the field. So a lot of different ways you can use an Elijah Arroyo. And I think he's getting there as a blocker as well. So really the thing is like, and the reason he had a breakout year this year was because he was fully healthy. Couldn't say the same thing in 2022 and 2023. So as long as Elijah Arroyo is healthy, I think there's a rock-solid football player there. And we got to talk to him, too, and it's fun. He had 7 touchdowns last year at Miami, and he calls, the red zone, because we interviewed him on Red Zone Day at the Senior Bowl, and he says, that's the tight end zone. And, of course, he scored a couple of touchdowns there during the one-on-ones and the team drills, of course, but more importantly, the team drills there. And yeah, I think you're getting a really nice red zone target there for sure. Same is true for Mason Taylor though. But I mean, this guy, not necessarily like top end athleticism like an Elijah Arroyo, but you just watch him move and it's effortless, smooth, and you almost just kind of forget that he's pulling away from a linebacker because he is a little bit more athletic and he does have a little bit more to him than what it looks like at 6'5" and an eighth and 251 pounds. Not the best blocker, I'll admit that, but I think there's reason for him to continue to grow and get better there with better coaching at the next level. 251 pounds, I think that's a good frame for him to be able to play in line. But very sure-handed. I think just like the way he can watch a ball, his eyes are just rock solid. Body positioning over the middle of the field or working the sideline, it's just fantastic. Good improv player too, always has his eyes on the quarterback, willing and able to make a big play there when it goes off script. So Mason Taylor is just going to be a guy that I feel like plays 10 years in the league. Like, I have a hard time thinking that it's just going to be a short stint for my guy, Mason Taylor. Tight end number 2, Colston Loveland. Tight end number 1, Tyler Warren. These guys both have first-round grades for me. I've talked about them an abundance, so won't go on too long here. Colston Loveland, 6'5" 3/4", 248 pounds, 10-inch hands. This guy is a silky smooth route runner, sure-handed. Just didn't really have the production this year because of Michigan's quarterback play. But man, this guy can get open with the best of them. And again, very sure-handed. He can play slot. Honestly, it's 6'5" and almost 250 pounds. He could play in line. At the beginning of this process, I was like, you may not love him as an inline tight end, but I think there's enough there to be able to make that work. You'd also use him as an H-back, get him in motion. Could even line him up out wide if you get the right offensive scheme and get the right mismatch. So just a whole lot of flexible versatility that comes with the pass catcher that is Colston Loveland. And, he's kind of these two tight ends, he plays more like a Brock Bowers, which is, just after last year, I feel like that's the commodity everyone wants. And then there's Tyler Warren, who, finally we have someone that, when you say Baby Gronk, it's not like, yeah, that's a reach. Tyler Warren, that Baby Gronk definitely makes sense. 6'5" and a half, 256 pounds. I also do have to admit, he's from Mechanicsville, Virginia. It's about 15 minutes away from where I live. His dad played at the University of Richmond. I live in Richmond, Virginia, so I'm a little bit biased towards the guy. He's just like a hashtag fun to watch guy for me. But, 104 catches, 1,230 yards, 8 touchdowns, only 3 drops last year. What's not to love about Tyler Warren in the tape? Look at the USC game. You want to talk about how Harold Fannin put Bowling Green on his back? Penn State's passing attack was single-handedly number 44, Tyler Warren, because they didn't really have any great receiver play. Great seam runner, a good enough route runner, enough of an athlete to be able to separate, and does enough nuance there to get just open enough, really at the top of the route. Can work middle of the field, he can work outside, and an absolute tank after the catch. So again, he's kind of more of the Baby Gronk, Colston Loveland more of the pseudo Brock Bowers type. So it really just comes down to what type of tight end do you think your offense is going to better utilize / which one's on the board. I think Warren will go first, but at the same time, depending on who the offense is and what they're looking for, I could still see a world where Loveland did go ahead of Warren. That's what happened when we had friend of the pod Mike Renner on and that 2-round mock with him. So if you missed that, definitely go back and check it out and hear his rationale for why he has Colston Loveland as tight end number 1. But for me, tight end number 1 is Tyler Warren, but I also have a first-round grade on Colston Loveland. And just checking my big board real quick, Colston Loveland checks in as player number 13 on my board. So, yeah, Warren in the top 10, Loveland not far behind. These are just 2 awesome pass-catching options for your offense. But, guys, that's going to do it for our wide receiver and tight end rankings. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. Who's too high? Who's too low? And who are some of the names that I left off that you feel like, hey, there's no way that guy's not a top 10 tight end. Hey, no way that guy's not a top 20 receiver. I'd love to hear who you think I missed out on, either in the YouTube comments or in a reply back on X, or you can shoot me a DM on X at TJ Wingert, spelled Wengert. That is going to do it for us. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, 32 Beat Writers PR, signing off.